Thank you. Good to see you and Mother Eliza. And it's just good to be with all the good people of St. Peter's and your bishop, Bishop Carla Hughes. And um, it's just good to be with you. I don't know if it's chilly in Newark, but it's chilly in North Carolina. And for us, that means it's cold, even if it's just chilly.
Welcome. It's chilly.
That's right. But thank you for asking me to do this. And I'm really glad we could spend some time together. And I can share some reflections. And I don't know if we have time for conversation, but I'm open to that if it's technically possible, if we can pull it off. But thank you for it. And it's a particular honor, I have to say, to be able to do this in honor of the Spongs and Thanksgiving for their ministry, which always was leading us in new directions and trying to follow the risen Christ and the power of the Spirit, wherever that Spirit was leading us. And I think that's going to be more critical for us as church, as people of God, not only in these days in which we're living, but in the days and the years that are ahead of us. Phyllis Tribble told us a long time ago, she said, this age of remarkable and rapid change of the entire landscape of virtually everything will be an age where we must follow the Spirit of the risen Christ into the future. And I think Phyllis was right on that one. I gave a title for this, and I hope it doesn't seem oblique. I debated it, but actually I think it's fitting for the moments that we find ourselves. Is e pluribus unum possible? And I have to tell you, this goes back to the days when I was Bishop of North Carolina. I was pretty new, and I was actually I was in Oxford visiting the two churches in Oxford, North Carolina, St. Cyprian's and St. Stephen's there. And in the course of the visitation, the local newspaper person, this is back in 2000, 2001, roughly, the local newspaper person interviewed me. You know, I was a new bishop, so I was of interest. After you've been there a while, nobody's of interest. But I was still new and of interest. And so I don't remember the entire interview, but I do remember that she asked me, what did I see as the greatest challenge facing the Episcopal Church? And I assumed she was alluding to human sexuality, and because that was in the air at that point in time. And I assumed that's where she was going. But even before I really had thought about it in any depth, I blurted out e pluribus unum, out of from many one. And we went on to talk about that. And I don't remember what I said in any depth or detail. And I think I spoke less than what I knew, but what I was intuiting, what I sensed. I have no question in my mind that e pluribus unum is a fundamental question for us in this country at this particular time, but not just in this country. I am having similar conversations with colleagues around our Anglican communion who are seeing some of the same fissures, some of the same divisions played out contextually in their context, but some of the same fissures and same divisions and same temptations to yield to easy solutions that could yield various forms of fascisms, the temptation to yield easy solutions to deep and complex realities. And so the question of e pluribus unum is not simply one for those of us who are blessed to live in this country. It is the question that Dr. King really asked long ago and kept asking it in the year before he died, when he said, we shall either learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we shall perish together as fools. The choice is ours, chaos or community. Is e pluribus unum possible? I have no idea what's going to be written about the year 2020, but what a year. I saw one of those memes on, I think it was on Facebook, that basically said, is 2020 over yet? I mean, there is a sense in which, my God, when New Year's began almost a year ago now, I can't imagine anybody except maybe the epidemiologists having any sense that this would be a year like this. We knew it was going to be interesting, but I don't think anybody saw what was coming. This has been a year. It is a year and a time and a period of multiple pandemics all hitting at the same time. The interesting thing about pandemics, if you start with COVID-19, the reality is the virus had been around. Now, I don't know, I'm not sure we know how long it had been around, but it had been around. But it had been underground. And it came to the surface, and we started to realize it as the year began to unfold. And then we began to realize it even more as the year unfolded even more. But it was there. It was there invisibly. And the impact of this virus on us all and on the shape of American and global civilization, we do not know yet, but it will, something has changed and is changing. Something new and different is emerging. And we will walk through it, and it will be difficult, and it will be, the tragedy is it has unveiled something that was there all along. The disparities between the rich, the middle class, the working poor, and the poor have become even more egregious. The access to health care makes all the difference in the world. People who must work and put themselves in danger to some extent must do it in order to keep food on the table. These realities have been here all along, but this virus has exposed the invisible realities of our human discontinuities created by injustices built into the way things are. But not just COVID-19. There's a pandemic that some have said goes back to 1619. Pandemic that reached the Americas, beginning to some extent with Jamestown and continuing with eventually the American settlement, or the settlement of what is now the United States, a period that led to enslavement of Africans, the forced removal and genocide of the indigenous peoples of the land, and the framing of a new and independent republic, a country that I love as you do. And while it was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are created equal, it was conceived in iniquity and injustice, both at the same time. And the iniquity of entrenched racism was baked into the soil, such that, as the Old Testament, the Hebrew prophets would say, the land itself was poisoned. And we couldn't get away from it. I was talking with another bishop just the other day who was describing, I don't know how we got on the subject of racism, who was describing, he says, he went into a cabin, it was actually at Canuga, he went into a cabin at Canuga recently, and there was just a little cobweb up in the corner, and a spider was doing the web. And he looked at that web and he said, that's what racism is like in America. As soon as you take a little part of the web away and remove it, the spider can make more and repair the web so that you keep getting trapped and insects keep getting trapped. He said, that is the nature and the reality of this beast that we call racism and all that it entails. We fought a civil war over it. We continue to labor and struggle with it. And we saw it when Japanese Americans were interred in the United States during the Second World War. We've seen it on the reservations as the indigenous people, the First Nation people of this land, continue to live in unremitting poverty. We've seen it in immigrant children separated from their mamas at the border of this country. Where Emma Lazarus wrote that poem at the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. We've seen it. 1619. And we saw it. And George Floyd was always there. When those called to protect and serve suffocated a man, took the breath that God had given him from him, till he cried out for his mama. He cried out, I can't breathe. He wasn't the first. God help us, he won't be the last, unfortunately. Eric Garner cried out the same thing, I can't breathe. I've met the mother of Trayvon Martin and been with her on several occasions. Her baby, her son. Being with her is like being with Mary after holding her son Jesus coming down from the cross. I can't breathe. And Breonna Taylor and Michael Brown, and we can go on and on. As if that's not enough, there was another unseen pandemic, another unseen social virus. The divisions, the deep divisions in this country, not just of race now, but divisions of social class, divisions of political ideology, divisions of people in our country who feel left behind. It was in 2016 during the, don't get depressed, there's hope. Oh, don't worry, there's hope. I mean, I know I'm laying it on you kind of heavy, but don't trust me. But it was back in 2016 during the last presidential election, during the primaries. It was back in March. Then candidate Donald Trump was in Fayetteville, not far from here. And he was having one of his rallies. And at the time of the rally, protesters came and were present. And that you will remember that happened at both Hillary Clinton rallies and Donald Trump rallies. Protesters from the opposite side would come and make their case. Well, the protest got a little bit out of hand, and so law enforcement was called in, and the sheriffs came in, and they escorted the protesters out, who left peacefully, but they left. And as they were coming out, a 79-year-old white man named John McGraw leapt over the sheriffs and punched a younger black man named Raheem Jones, punched him in the face. Well, the sheriffs immediately arrested McGraw and charged him with battery. And at the time, he said, and this was quoted in the Raleigh News and Observer, he said, this is McGraw speaking, he said he deserved it. The next time we see him, we might have to kill him. We don't know who he is. He might be with a terrorist organization. Listen carefully to the words. We don't know who he is. And then the conclusion, he might be part of a terrorist organization. Again, McGraw was arrested, charged with assault, and several months later was in court. He pleaded no contest. He apologized to Jones, who was present at the time, and he was sentenced to 12 months probation. Afterward, the two men actually met and had a brief conversation. And in the conversation, McGraw, again, the newspaper was right there and they heard him say it. But this time McGraw said to Raheem Jones, if I met you in the street, the same thing probably would have occurred. But maybe I would have said, you go home. One of us is going to get hurt. That's what I would have said. But we are caught up in a political mess today, you and me. We got to heal our country. We are caught up in a political mess together, you and me. We've got to heal our country. He's right. We are caught up in that spider's web, not only racism, but inequities, iniquity, injustices, wrongs, human being, Cain killing Abel over and over again, cycles of unremitting violence. We're caught in the web. You and me. We've got to heal our country. Is e pluribus unum possible? That really is the question. The American experiment in representative democracy is an experiment. And it may well be that Genesis 1, when God created human beings in God's image and likeness, it may well be that that was an experiment. Is e pluribus unum possible? Is it possible, to borrow from the words of Dr. King, is it possible for us to learn to live together as brothers and sisters and siblings, as children of God, all created in the image of God? Is it possible for us to learn how to live together and somehow fashion and create the beloved community as God originally intended when God said, let there be anything other than God? Is e pluribus unum possible? Or are we condemned to a fate of utter self-destruction? I wouldn't be a preacher. No, better yet, I wouldn't be a Christian if I didn't believe that it actually is possible. I don't just believe it, I know it. I know that human beings, together with their God, have the capacity to move beyond what Dr. King called the jangled discords of our discontent, to move beyond that to new possibilities. It is possible. And e pluribus unum may actually suggest the way. I got curious about the Latin phrase e pluribus unum and looked it up and did a little background research, and eventually came across this and discovered that it's probable, because the founders were very much enamored of the Roman Republic and of the ancient Greeks. And so it's probable that they would have picked it up, certainly from the Latin, of course, and from the Romans. And it turns out that the phrase e pluribus unum probably was first used by Cicero. You remember Cicero from the Roman Republic before it became an empire, but from the days of the Republic. And it was Cicero who said, and I quote, "When each person loves the other as much as himself, it makes one out of many possible." Let me read that one more time. When each person loves the other as much as himself, it makes one out of many possible. That was Cicero. But I have a vague memory of somebody else who said something very similar. I believe his name was Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, and I believe he wasn't the first one to say that. I believe it was actually Moses in the Torah, in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, who said, hear the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the first and great commandment. And then from Leviticus, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I could be wrong, but I think it's in the Sermon on the Mount. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. I believe, I could be wrong, but it was St. Paul, and I know folk have issues with St. Paul. My grandma used to say, St. Paul is like any other preacher. He has some good sermons and he has some not so good sermons. Paul's problem is they're all in the Bible. That's the issue. But Paul was having a good day in Romans 12 when he was talking about love. In chapter 12, he talks about love, and then he reaches the crescendo of this discussion on love, and he says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I want to suggest that Cicero, look, when Cicero, Jesus, Moses, and Paul are all saying the same thing, I think it's worth our paying attention to, because I think they're on to something. There's a marvelous passage that we all know. It's Luke's version of the conversation between Jesus and the lawyer. Matthew's version is in Matthew 22, where the lawyer asks, what is the greatest teaching in the entire legal edifice of Moses? And Jesus answers, love God, love your neighbor. And in Luke, it's slightly different. In Luke 10, it's a lawyer again who comes up to Jesus, and this time the question is not what's the greatest law in the laws of Moses. He says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? That question, see, that's an Oprah Winfrey kind of question. What must I do to inherit eternal life? That's a biblical way of saying, what must I do to discover, to discern the kind of life that is worth living, the kind of life that is so saturated with eternity, so saturated with dignity, so saturated with integrity that not even the titanic powers of death can take it away from you. What must I do to find that kind of life? I remember when I was a kid, my family, my father was an Episcopal priest, and so on his side of the family, there's a small group of Episcopalians, and then there's a slightly bigger group of Pentecostal holiness, and then there's a big group of Baptists. And we used to have this a standing family joke whenever somebody died about, how long it was going to take to get to the repast after the funeral. And the joke was, if it was somebody died from the Baptist side of the family, you knew it was going to take a little while before you got back to the church to eat. And if it's from the Pentecostal side of the family, it could be days. I mean, it would take forever because you knew that service was going to be long and it was going to take forever. But the joke was, if it was somebody from the Episcopal side of the family, don't worry, dinner's hot. You'll be here before it cools down. That was sort of the nature of our family. But what I remember, not so much in the Episcopal sermons, I have to admit I don't remember those that they don't stick in my mind. But I do remember the Baptist preacher who preached many family sermons always said this in his sermon. He said, you go to the cemetery, and this was a sermon that old black preachers used to preach all the time, so it wasn't his originally, but he said, you go to the cemetery and you look and you see the headstones, and on the headstone it would have the name, and it may have rest in peace or something like that, or beloved father, mother, or brother, sister, whatever, have that there. And then underneath the name of the person, you'll see the date and year that the person was born. Then there would be a little dash, and then there would be the date and the year of the person's death. And he said, Joe or Mary didn't have anything to do with the date and the year that they were born. They probably didn't have anything or much to do with the date or year that they died. But they had everything to do with that little dash in between the two. And the question that really matters is not your birth. You didn't have anything to do with that. Not your death. You probably didn't have anything to do with that. The question that matters is, what did you do with your dash? That's what that lawyer was coming to Jesus. What must I do with my dash to live a life that is worth living? And that's when Jesus in Luke 10 said, well, what did Moses say? And the Lord, being a good Lord, went back to the law, to the Torah, and said, you shall love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus in Luke 10 says, do that and you will live. That is the key, the secret to life, to love God and to love your neighbor. And while you're at it, love yourself. But this is a lawyer Jesus was talking to, and that wasn't enough. The lawyer said, well, that's good, Jesus. I like that. It's a good answer. And I know that's what Moses said. But I'm a lawyer, and we specialize in words. Words are very important. And so I'm wondering if we could more precisely define neighbor. Who is the neighbor? How can we, and what he was really asking was, how narrowly can we define neighbor? Can I define neighbor to those who are of my family? Define neighbor those that I love. Define neighbor those who are in my orbit. Define neighbor those who share my political views. Define neighbor those who are a Republican like me, or a Democrat like me, or an independent like me. Define neighbor as those who are of my country. Define neighbor those who are of my religion. Define neighbor those who are of my race. Define neighbor those who are look like me, act like me, but not the other. That's what he was asking. And that's when Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan. Somebody who helped somebody else out who was completely unlike them. The total and complete other, completely unlike them. And he helped them out just because they were another child of God. A fellow human being, a brother, a sister, a sibling. And Jesus ends the parable and says, now who was neighbor to the one who needed help? And the Lord said, well, I guess it was the one who helped him out. And Jesus said to him, as I think he's saying to us, go and do thou likewise. E pluribus unum? Is it possible? If you don't believe me, ask Cicero. When each person loves the other as much as himself, it makes one out of many possible. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I believe that this way, this attitude of life that is committed to seeking the good, the welfare, and the well-being of the other as well as the self. It is the difference between chaos and community. A few weeks ago, we all gave thanks, I think, for the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it was sort of remarkable to lose her and to have just lost John Lewis, 2 weeks before. When she died, the words that were said about her were really true and didn't need to be exaggerated. If I've ever seen what the public face of love looks like, I'm here to tell you, it looks like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It looks like John Lewis. In her case, and in his case as well, but in her case, she sacrificed sometimes her own time, her own precious time, not for what she could get out of it, but for what others could. She worked hours and labored and toiled at the law so that one day the founding principles of this country that were articulated, even if they weren't lived, would become true. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. She worked to make Abe Lincoln's words true, even if we didn't live up to them 407 years ago, our forefathers brought upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men, that all people, all children of God are created equal. She worked until that was more and more true for women and for girls and eventually for all of us. And she didn't have to do it. She didn't get rich because of it. She got famous. I think there's only one Supreme Court justice in the history of this country who's going to have the nickname Notorious RBG. She didn't do it for that. She did it because she loved. She loved something greater than self. She cared for the other. But in the course of her life, a documentary was made about her, titled Notorious RBG, named after kind of a playoff. There's a book by that title, kind of a playoff the Notorious B.I.G., who was a rapper. Like I said, I would never have put a Supreme Court justice and a rapper together, but only in America. And in the course of the documentary, the interviewer at one point said, you've been an advocate for women's rights, equality, for the equality of all people in this country. You have been a fervent advocate, and yet you sit on the Supreme Court, and there's a justice on that Supreme Court who often sounds like he's the exact opposite of you, Justice Scalia. I mean, the two of you don't agree on anything. And she sat there, and it was really one of these wonderful moments. She said, yeah. And the interviewer said, is it true that you all are best friends? And she said, yes. And the interviewer was like, how? And she said, well, we both love opera. And so they and their spouses would go to the opera together. And then she said, well, and we both love to travel. And as a result, they and their spouses would go on vacation together, would travel together. And then she said, in a more serious vein, we both love the Constitution of the United States. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union. She used the word love 3 times and described how a shared love, unselfishly, lavishly lived into, created space for 2 people to disagree and yet to honor one another and maybe find a way forward together. I believe e pluribus unum is possible, and that the way of love can make the way forward for us and for the global community. Cicero was right. Jesus was right. Better yet, God was right. E pluribus unum is possible. Amen. Father Bob, hit unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to say Michael was right too, because you were so on target for what we're all facing, trying to be a community of citizens of the United States and also trying to be followers of Jesus. Yes. And they are not necessarily easy to do.
No, they aren't.
And that's the risk. And your courage to say those words helps all of us. Courage begets courage, I think.
Yes, Paul.
Yeah. I don't know if you're ready if you want to take any questions or not.
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, Patty, if you do the chat, you can do that. You can pick up
Yes.
one or two.
If you'd like to ask some questions, please put them into chat and we'll unmute you so that you can ask them. I'm seeing lots of thank you, Bishop Currys in chat.
Thank you all. Thank you for.
And I'm sure Bishop Spong sends his thanks. He was a man like you who was on the edge.
He's a greater man than I, but yeah. And a Tar Heel, North Carolina.
Go Heels.
Go Heels.
But thank you for telling the story about two opposites being able and using the word love. And Bob and I were sitting here and we said that's what we miss so much is the decency and the decorum between human beings to be able to fight like holy hell and still love each other and laugh together and hold each other when you're weeping.
And to give dignity to somebody who disagrees with you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for being that for our church in the world.
Yeah. I think for the world. I think Mother Liza is right. It's not just for our church. You've done it for the world, and you're a person that people look to for the kind of love and courage that you talk about.
I really pray so. We can do it together.
Yes,
it's the Anglican way of comprehensiveness.
That's right.
It actually is.
With Justin Comer has a question, and Justin, I gave you a request to unmute, please.
Patty, thank you very much. Bishop Michael, thank you so much. My question is just that your words are inspiring and they feel like the truth that we know, and yet sometimes I find myself maybe at a dinner party or having drinks with somebody and they will say something that just makes my blood boil, and then no matter what I've tried to tell myself in terms of trying to see the other person goes out the window. I have no doubt that in your life you have faced far greater challenges than I face. How do you, in those moments, try to come back to living what you've preached?
I have to tell you, I don't always do it. I mean, you know, what you're describing is the reality of being human. I'll tell it that really, you know, I mean, I have to admit there's a part of me that thinks that's why I need church. And when I say church, I mean faith community, a community of love, support, and challenge that can help me when I'm not strong, that can help me nourish and nurture a relationship with God, who's the source of the kind of love I'm describing, who is the perfect source of that, to help me, who is a very imperfect vessel of that. And so that, I mean, I really am convinced that there's something about that ongoing living relationship with God and an ongoing living relationship with community that holds us accountable and that lifts us up, and that can challenge and encourage, because it is hard. This is almost countercultural, and on some levels counterintuitive. I think Jesus knew that when he was saying. I mean, I really do. I think Jesus knew that, because if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, you realize, okay, he had to know that this was an invitation that was, it's almost, if this is a silly way to say it, but if you hit me, my first instinct is not to kiss you. You know, it's just not. And that's, I suspect there's some evolutionary biology that explains that. But in terms of living beyond my evolutionary biology, I'm either going to have the two reactions, fight or flight, right? Depending on how big you are, I may run. but if I look like I can handle you, I may take you on. You know, but that's basic biology. I mean, it is. That's evolutionary biology. It's how our ancestors survived in the wild. I mean, that's how they do it. If we're, you know, Jesus said, "Is not life more than food, the body more than clothing?" All that stuff was, Jesus was showing us how to live beyond our base nature, how to live a life that's somewhat reflective of the life of God. I think that's what he was really trying to show us to do. Paul talks about it in terms of flesh and spirit. And I suspect that I need an ongoing relationship with the God who is the source of that. And my experience, to be honest, in my life is that has most often been mediated in the context of human communities where I've actually experienced that kind of love and support that has helped me along. And I have to admit, I go to church, so to speak. I mean, that's saying it very simplistic. I go to church because I need to be reminded, because my faith gets weak too. I need to be reminded that Jesus rose from the dead and that evil is not going to triumph. That evil will not have the last. And I got to be reminded of that, because a lot of what I experience in life tells me the opposite. Oh, am I echoing? Oh, it's me. The wonders of technology. So I really do think we need each other. I was telling somebody recently that this community of love, I mean, it can be formal church, but it can be other community, other ways. My wife and some of her cousins and sisters, they have a book club. And for years, I tried to figure out what's this book club about. And because I asked her at one point, I said, well, what book are y'all reading? And she couldn't tell me. She said, well, so-and-so was reading this book and somebody else was reading another book and all these. I said, wait a minute, what kind of book club is this? Don't you all just read one book together and discuss it? She said, well, no. I said, what do you do in this book club? I finally realized that the book club, the book, is an occasion for gathering. This is a group of women who've been doing this for 10 years, I think. They journeyed through their lives together. It's a community of love, support, challenge, and that's how you make it through. I mean, I quote this all the time, and I know the bishops, I know Bishop Carley's on, but the bishops have heard me say this over and over again, but it's the wisdom. It comes from the slaves in this country, and it suggests the wisdom of how you make it against the odds. They used to say, walk together, children, and don't you get weary, because there is a great camp meeting in the promised land. Walk together. There is a great camp meeting. And together, we can hold each other and keep walking. Even when some of us fall, even when some of us get weak, we can hold each other forward. Thank you, Justin.
David's iPhone, you have a question? David's iPhone, you have a question?
Hi, Mr. Curry. Thank you so much for your presence.
David, I can't quite hear you. Can you?
Okay.
David, I can't quite hear you.
Can you hear me okay now?
Oh,
can you hear me? Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah. Perfect.
Oh, shoot.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for your words and your presence today. My three boys and I first got to know you through the Ben and Jerry's factory tour video, and we've been huge fans ever since.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Oh my gosh, yes. The Poor People's Campaign video.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
My question is.
Oh my gosh.
That was terrific. And I think my question is probably asked and answered, but I'll try to ask one more lawyer's question. And here it is. I've struggled, and maybe others have struggled throughout my life, in seeing people that have used Christianity to justify the worst abuses, the worst forms of discrimination. And I have a hard time reconciling that with what I want to believe Christianity is. How do I better find my neighbor in that context?
I have a theory that Christianity, let me just do big, Christianity writ large, if you look at its history, has gone off base. Boy, I'm really echoing. Can you hear me okay? Are you able to, that Christianity has gone off base historically, the further it has strayed from the teachings and the spirit of Jesus of Nazareth. Consistently. There, I mean, I got the people in North Carolina gave me a sabbatical some years ago after I'd been there about 7 or 8 years. And I decided I was studying the Sermon on the Mount and pro and anti-slavery apologist, a Christian apologist. And there was a discernible pattern. The pro-slavery apologists never quoted or referenced Jesus of Nazareth. They avoided him like the plague. The abolitionists, they went to Jesus fast. They would go there quickly. I mean, they would go to Matthew 25. They'd go to Luke 4. I mean, they would go to the Good Samaritan. They would go over to love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, they went there over and over again. And I realized there was a reason for that pattern. That if bigotry is your game, Jesus is not your name. It won't work. You have to so twist and distort him. Even the Nazis tried it and it didn't work. They had to make him an Aryan. They tried to make him an Aryan and say he wasn't Jewish. See what I mean? The actual Jesus of Nazareth, the Jesus in the New Testament won't work if your business is exclusion, if it's bigotry, if it's hatred, it won't work. So what you have to do is you have to construct something else and go all the way around Robin Hood's barn and use any justification you can and make it sound religious, but don't actually have anything to do with Jesus. If you listen to some religious voices, even today, that justify inhumanity, they won't reference Jesus of Nazareth. They'll sound religious, but they don't quote the Sermon on the Mount. You don't hear anything about the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, as you did it to the least of these who are my brothers and sisters, you have done it unto me. You don't hear it, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You don't hear any of that stuff. They'll use everything else. I think that first is to be clear about what the face of Christianity really is. The face of Christianity, of a Christian, is the face of the Jesus who touched and healed lepers. The face of the Jesus who fed the poor when they were hungry. The face of Jesus. And that face, that reality will not fail us. I'm convinced that, I mean, that's, I won't go, but I am convinced that that's a key to reclaim the Jesus of the Gospels. And I think our church, our liturgical tradition suggests something. Have you noticed that we actually stand up when we read the Gospel in the Holy Eucharist? Which I think is a liturgical way of saying, now, you know, I'm not a liturgical scholar, but this is how I've experienced. I think that is a liturgical way of saying that Jesus, his way of love, his way of life, that is the way we interpret and hear all of Scripture, and that is the way we interpret what it means to be a Christian, if you will, to follow in his footsteps and his way. And I've just started saying, if it doesn't look like Jesus, if it doesn't smell like Jesus, if it doesn't meet the divine smell test, if it doesn't smell like Jesus, then it can't claim to be Christian. It can be something else, but it can't claim to be Christian, no matter how holy and sanctimonious it may sound on the radio or television. If it doesn't look like the love of God that we've known in Jesus Christ, it can't claim to be Christian. Thank you, brother.
James Ragsdale?
Yes, ma'am. Bishop Curry, I keep seeing these just tons of comments that just indicate that we all crave e pluribus unum. And my question is, what is it that Americans are afraid of that keeps us from achieving e pluribus unum? I'm basing this on unfortunately, I've been on Facebook too much, and some of the commentary is just brutal.
Yeah.
And so much us against them.
Yes.
And I'm doing my best to stem the tide, but I think I'm just going to have to get off of Facebook because it's terrible for me.
No, you're on. I mean, there's something about the impulsivity, the impulsive nature of social media. It's reactive. And I'm not against social media, but there is something about it that makes reactive kind of rather than reflective conversation possible. And I don't know what to do about that, except I know that you're right. You're on to something. I mean, something can spin out there in that orbit, and it doesn't even have to be true. And it's like, I mean, it's like a cow in the middle of the Amazon River. The piranha just come in, they just start eating. It's like a feeding frenzy. I think we've got. I don't have a solution. I wish I did, but I do think we've got to inject or infuse as much goodness as we can everywhere we can. John Wesley said, do all the good you can, every way you can, everywhere you can, with anybody you can. And I think, there's something to that there's a kind of propaganda dynamic that goes on with negativity, that it takes on a life of its own and it starts to become the reality. And I think you counter that. I mean, Dr. King said, darkness cannot cast out darkness, only light can do that. Hatred cannot cast out hatred, only love can do that. I think he's right. I mean, Gandhi said a very similar kind of thing. I think it's going to take an infusion of light to banish the darkness, like the Christophers say. It's going to take infusion of goodness. And I think we have to continue to struggle with it. It's an ongoing struggle. That's why there's a part of me that I haven't really explored this in any great depth. There's a part of me that thinks, God may have been trying an experiment in Genesis 1, and the jury is still out, and we're in the middle of it. There's a part of me that wants to say, Lord, would you just fix this for us, please? But no, God said, you're big boys and girls. I'm gonna give you all the tools you need. But you're gonna have to do this. I'll join hands with you, but you're not gonna make me do what I know you can do yourselves. But it's hard. I was in a conversation with John Meacham a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking. Well, we got on the subject of the kingdom of God, and he said to me, when he was doing his book on John Lewis, that he asked Lewis, he said, do you really believe that the beloved community that Dr. King talked about, which was a way of talking about, what the Bible talks about, the kingdom or the reign of God. He asked John Lewis, do you really believe that that's possible? And he said, Lewis looked at him and said, yes. If I didn't, I wouldn't try. I believe it's possible. Believe it or not, we claim that it's possible every time we pray the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And yet we know it's possible, but not easily attained. But it's possible. As long as it's possible, it's worth striving for, because the alternative is so bad, we don't want to go there. And, I have to admit, I don't think I'm naive, but there's a part of me that even while we're in the middle of this American experiment, which is really dicey right now, I just believe that in the long run, injustice and tyranny does not have the last word. James Russell Lowell, who was an abolitionist, was president at Harvard University. I think he was a Unitarian minister, but in the midst of the anti-slavery struggle and the Spanish-American War, he wrote a poem that used to be in our hymnal. They took it out because there's some interesting theological language in it. But there's this one verse that's kosher theologically, that says, though the cause of evil prosper, yet his truth alone is strong. Though her portion be a scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. I believe that even on days when I can't see it. And I'm just stubborn, cussed, like my grandma would say, cussed stubborn enough that I'm not going to quit, God help me, until something of that beloved community, something of it becomes even more real, if not for me, for generations after I'm gone. And you know, progress has happened. We've seen it. It has happened. This is another, well, unrelated to this, but it's related. When I was in maybe the fourth or fifth grade, I remember coming home and Daddy asked me if I got my medicine at school today. And at first I was wondering why he knew what I was talking about. And we had gotten what he was referring to. I guess the parents had gotten a notice. You may remember when you were about third or fourth grade, they give you a little sugar cube and there was like some medicine or something on it. And it was the polio vaccine. And, you know, I didn't know why. I said, yeah, they gave us some sugar and there was some medicine or something on it. And they said, eat it. So I ate it. And yeah, it tasted pretty good because it tasted like the sugar. What I didn't know until years later, it was years later when he was himself sick. His sister, my Aunt Carrie, was rubbing his legs. He was in the bed. He was in the ICU unit, and she was rubbing his leg and singing. And I said, "Why are you rubbing his legs?" He had a stroke. So I said, "Why are you rubbing his legs? The stroke was his head." And she said, "No, didn't you know?" I said, "Didn't I know what?" She did. Didn't you know that your daddy had polio when he was a little boy? And I said, I knew he always walked with a limp, but I never asked him why. And then I remembered him asking me, did I get my medicine at school? The little sugar cube with the polio vaccine. His son got the polio vaccine that he didn't get because somebody named Johannes Salk, a scientist, helped human progress to happen, to make polio as much history as we could. And it did. Human progress is possible. It's not easy, and it's not quantum leaps. It's slugging in the mud a lot of time, but it is possible. And there are scientists researching who do it because they believe they can find the cure for whatever it is, and they keep going at it. And the same thing is true with our social progress. We got to keep going at it and not quit. Anyway, that's probably more than you asked for. Hang in there, brother. Hang in there.
Eric Soledel has a question.
Hello, Bishop Curry. Nice to see you this evening.
I love that background.
Well, you were there.
Yeah.
You made that roof raise up a little bit with your preaching, thank God.
Oh, my Lord.
Working in Patterson and being in a community that has been so captive, and I like to say we're living in captivity right now. Do you believe that COVID-19 has helped us realize that love, or e pluribus unum, is possible and it's going to happen because we can't do anything else?
I hope that's true. The jury's still out. But I think, it's hard to know because we're still in the middle of it. I know for a lot of us, there is that sense. For a lot of people, there is that sense that we've got to find a better way. We've got to figure out how to live together. I'm hearing that in conversations. I have to admit, I'm around religious folk, so I may be getting a skewed perspective, but now I'm hearing it more frequently from people who are both church folk and non-church folk and different religious faith traditions, kind of saying the same thing. We've got to figure out how to get along. And some of it's just this whole experience of everything from the racism thing, from the division thing, to the COVID and what it's exposed. It's churned up something, and we've looked at it and said, we don't want to be like this. And I think there is a yearning from, I think probably most of us. I think you're onto something. I don't think it's just being naive and hopeful on my part. I think there is a deeper yearning for a better way to be. And I think it's there and it's real. The politics is polarizing it and kind of suppressing that. But what gave me some hope, and I haven't given up some hope, is the protests that happened after both George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud in Atlanta, and the protests. I haven't analyzed this, but first of all, these were protests of young people. These weren't people my age. It wasn't my gang out there. These were young people. And secondly, if you go back to Michael Brown or Eric Garner, the protests that occurred after that, while they were somewhat multi-ethnic, they were predominantly peoples of color in the streets. And the Black Lives Matter movement around Trayvon and all that started, it was around peoples of color. These protests now in the last several months, it has been the Rainbow Children of God. It has been the most multiracial, diverse protest movement that, got going. My daughter, and to tell you the truth, I was kind of off the map for a lot of it. Our youngest daughter just sent us a text one night. This is earlier in the summer, and she said she was at the protest at the state capitol here in Raleigh. And so I texted her back. I said, well, where are you? And she said wherever she was, in the state capitol area. And she said, oh, there's tear gas or something. And I said, well, you need to go in the opposite direction of the tear gas. And so she did. So later on we talked, and I said, well, how did you find out about it? She said, well, it was on social media. The protests were happening and I didn't even know it. They were way out of my radar. And I realized it was a whole nother generation that was out in the streets. And that was true all over the country, and not just in our big cities. It was in small towns. You were seeing Black Lives Matter in little towns where you would never expect it. Now, there are other areas where there were other messages. What that tells me is the ideals of e pluribus unum haven't gone away, because I think they're deeper in the human heart than we sometimes realize. There's something about us that knows we were meant to live together. And I think it may be our young people. And I know there's some other young people of a different persuasion, but they're not the majority. They're not the majority. It may well be that another youth movement will help to lead us, help us find our soul again. For whatever reason, Martin King was in his 30s when he died. Jesus was just 33. 67-year-old people like me, and we don't, we'll discuss it, but Thank you.
One final question, if we may, Bishop Curry, from Lori Harrison.
Thank you so much, Bishop Curry. I think you've already said a little bit about this, but I have faith that we can make a difference. And I'd like to ask you, how can we make e pluribus unum echo? How do we say it, proclaim it, and invite the echo when we leave here?
Oh, I think you gotta claim it. I do, I know this sounds ridiculous, but there's a part of me that's realized, do we say as a nation that we really, we pledge allegiance to the flag and all that, and all that. But read the last sentence, one nation under God, indivisible, and listen to with liberty and justice for all. I think we need to claim the ideals and the values that we actually share We say it in the Pledge of Allegiance. It's there. I mean, I'm not making up the Gettysburg Address. I didn't give it. Abe did. You know, I'm not making up the Declaration of Independence. You know, it's all right there, and it's ours. And I think people like us have to reclaim that, and to claim those values as the values on which we can build a more perfect union. Whereas the old slaves used to say there's plenty good room for all God's children. And I think we've got to advocate for the values of America and its ideals, its principles, knowing that it didn't live up to, I know it didn't live up to, good Lord, I'm a descendant of African slaves. Believe me, I know it didn't live up to them. But that doesn't invalidate the ideal. The ideal was right, even if those who wrote it didn't live up to it. And I really do, Laura, I think if we would advocate for it, that can become infectious. And maybe even, I mean, I don't pray for any particular candidate to win, although I admit the temptation is there, but I don't. I know I'm not supposed to do that, and I don't. Well, I mean, I'm not supposed to talk about it as the chancellor of the Episcopal Church reminds me, do not go partisan, and I don't. But to pray that we will live those ideals, I believe that that's a perfectly kosher prayer. To pray that we will live the ideals of equality, of freedom, and of justice for all, and that we will be a nation that reflects that. I think that's worth praying for, because last time I checked, God is the author of true freedom and of real justice and the source of it all. So keep advocating for it, and don't be ashamed to advocate for it. Hang in there. We're gonna make it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Bob.
You know, it's we promised you that it would be a half an hour or an hour, and we're gonna stick to that. But your words have been amazing tonight, and also what you do is you help us believe in ourselves. You know, you help us believe that we can do this. You know, it's kind of like in that Russell Lowell poem, "Time makes ancient good uncouth."
Yes.
We must upward and onward. You know.
Yes.
And that's when we get back from the pandemic, it's going to be a brand new church, and we're going to have to reinvent it to some extent.
You are right.
Yeah.
You are right.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
Thank you
We
so
love you.
much.
Thank you for inviting me. God bless you guys. Be safe.
And
Take care of
stay
each
well.
other.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.